Welcome to the 30-day novel NaNoWriMo series. This is day 25. My name is Lynn Johnston and I blog at writesmarternotharder.com. You know what I'm going to say if you've been following the series. First of all, we always start with talking about how you're going to move your story forward today. Now, your characters have just rallied from their dark moment and they are preparing for the climax of the story. They're going to have some new determination that they mustered up during their rallying scene. And now your protagonist and his or her allies are preparing for a final do or die confrontation with the antagonist. So, your protagonist. What is your protagonist's plan for defeating the antagonist? At this point, if he has or she has some hope that the day can be saved, he or she probably has some idea of how that could happen. And it might be that that's not how it actually happens, but going into it, you want your protagonist to have a plan or a strategy or some sort of idea of what approach they're going to take in confronting the antagonist. And maybe your protagonist doesn't think they're going to have to confront the antagonist. Of course, we know he or she will, because that final showdown needs to be between the two people who've been clashing throughout the whole book. But it's possible that your protagonist thinks they're going to sneak into the antagonist's base and steal something without the antagonist ever knowing. And that's cool if that's the plan. Also, you want to ask yourself, how does the protagonist's growth so far make him or her more likely to succeed? And we've talked about the growth arc. The climax is that final point in the growth arc where your characters change, solidifies, and we realize that yes, the protagonist has become this new person that he or she has been trying to become throughout the whole story, whether it's overcoming a flaw or a wound finally healing, or it could be that the wound, they finally reached the point where the wound can start healing. Maybe we don't see the wound completely healed at the climax, but we just finally see the protagonist reaching a place where the healing can begin. Or it can be about like putting backstory to rest. Maybe your protagonist has been seeking revenge for the death of her mother for 25 years and she has finally tracked down the killer. Or it could be that maybe your protagonist is finally confronting the person who stole his idea and made millions of dollars off of it. And maybe he doesn't get his idea back. Maybe what he realizes is that he needs to move on. Maybe your climax doesn't involve crushing your antagonist. Maybe it involves your protagonist taking the higher road, or reaching a point where they are no longer attached to that backstory, and that backstory basically is resting in peace. Whatever kind of growth arc you've set up for your character, the climax is where it either resolves, or it resolves enough that the reader is going to believe that after the book is over, the healing process will finish. Looking at your other characters, you can ask yourself which of the protagonist's allies is still with him or her. And also, what are the antagonist forces doing to prepare for this kind of final confrontation? Do they know that the protagonist has rallied? Or are they going to be taken by surprise? Now, even if your protagonist has rallied in secret and your antagonist does not know they're coming, your antagonist still should be doing something. Your antagonist drives the story in the sense that your antagonists and whatever trouble they are trying to cause is what stirs everything up for your protagonist. So whatever goal your antagonist has been pursuing, whether it is to finally build the death laser that is going to blow up the protagonist's planet, or whether it is the cheerleading finals where the antagonist is determined to like win the place that the protagonist is going for, whatever kind of goals you set your protagonist and your antagonist up for, your antagonist should still be working towards theirs. Even though the protagonist is defeating the protagonist is a secondary goal for the antagonist. The antagonist wants something, wants to rule the world, wants to win the trophy, whatever it is that is up for grabs in your story. The antagonist has that as their primary goal. The protagonist is really the antagonist's secondary goal, because the protagonist is someone who just keeps getting in the way. So Your protagonist needs to be actively working towards whatever this final confrontation entails, just like your protagonist does. And this may or may not cause problems for your protagonist. Maybe your protagonist has to like avoid the antagonist as to avoid tipping them off, or maybe they know, but they both know that they're there. They're both out there practicing their hearts out for the final cheer competition that's going to determine who gets the trophy and is the best cheerleader ever. Maybe it really doesn't matter in terms of whether or not they know or not, except to the extent that it affects the story that you're trying to tell. Either way works, but they both need to be working hard for this. You can't just have your protagonist be working hard and your antagonist sitting around twiddling his thumbs and chuckling evilly, because he's not a worthy adversary. And you want your protagonist's victory to be meaningful. You want it to be the defeat of a worthy adversary at the climax. So whether or not you show what the antagonist is doing, you need to know what they're doing to prepare for the climax, just like you need to, but you do need to show what the protagonist is doing. They both need to be working. So looking at the conflict of your story, what does your protagonist have to do to prepare themselves for the final confrontation? Maybe nothing. Maybe your protagonist came out of that dark moment completely mentally focused on doing what they needed to do. It's possible that that's not the case, though. It's possible also that your protagonist is trying to convince themselves that they can win, or to psych themselves up. It could be that they have to rationalize something in order to believe that they're going into this and they've got a good chance of winning. They might be rationalizing the sacrificing of troops, looking at the battle plan and saying, there's no way that when we take the moat, 10% of our force is probably going to die, and I have to find a way to be okay with that. So whatever challenges your protagonist is facing, based on the plan they've come up with, they probably have to do something to prepare themselves mentally to get comfortable with some aspect of the plan. They might be thinking about how much they love each and every one of their allies that could possibly die in this next battle. They could be making peace. Maybe your protagonist is planning to totally sacrifice himself, and he's going around to all his loved ones and saying goodbye for the final time. That's a kind of mental preparation. So think about that, in part because it's going to give you another opportunity to set up this final point on the growth arc. It's also going to give you an opportunity to reveal stakes, basically show how important this is to the protagonist and what it means through their thoughts. You also want to ask yourself, just what does the protagonist need to do physically to prepare for the climax? What allies do they need to recruit? Do they have to go and convince their neighbor to donate some troops or supplies? Do they need to go and get a final magic gem that somebody else is holding, and maybe they need to negotiate for that just so they can take the gem into battle in their staff and be sure that their powers are as complete as possible? Do they have to make any arrangements? Do they have to send someone out to stake out the villain's hideout? Do they need to go and bribe some people to go spread a rumor? Do they need to go and talk to their mentor one last time and get that final piece of advice from their mentor that is going to make everything click for them at the climax when they have to make that ultimate decision that they're going to be facing? And finally, what are the stakes for this final confrontation? Not just for the protagonist, but for everybody that the protagonist loves. Is your protagonist going into this battle and knowing that his girlfriend is going to die if he doesn't succeed because the antagonist is going to kill her? Is she going to marry the antagonist if he doesn't succeed? Sometimes the stakes are higher than others depending on what kind of story you're telling. If the ultimate confrontation in your novel, it's a young adult novel and it's a cheerleading competition, the stakes are not life or death, but they should be high for the protagonist. In other words, the protagonist should suffer seriously if she loses at this final confrontation. And we want to see why she's going to suffer, what it means to her. The conflict, remember, fiction is not just about a series of events. It's about a series of events that when you string them together, they convey meaning. So what does this final confrontation mean to your protagonist? Will she have to change schools because she'd be so humiliated if she doesn't actually win after all the bragging she's done? Is she trying to raise money for charity? Are people going to suffer who she personally knows if she doesn't succeed in winning the competition so she can donate the money to charity? Whatever it is that you set up for her, make sure that the reader knows what those stakes are and, has kind of a reminder through what your protagonist is doing preparation-wise, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they say to the people around them in today's scene. So basically you're setting the reader up to really care about it by showing how your protagonist really cares about this final confrontation and the outcome of it. Looking at your setting, ask yourself, where do the protagonist and his or her allies need to go to prepare for the final confrontation? Do they have to go somewhere else? Can they just stay exactly where they are? And ideally, it would be great if they didn't, right? Because the more you can vary your setting and give your characters interesting settings as backgrounds, the more engaging those scenes will be to the reader. Because preparation is not going to be as conflict filled, and it's probably not going to be quite as tense. We've come down emotionally in terms of emotional intensity. The dark moment was really dark, hopefully. And then the rallying point gives hope. And right now, we're not at that frenzied climax that we are pushing towards. We're starting to prepare. So the emotional intensity of these scenes today is going to be a little bit lower. And if you can find other ways to make them compelling, maybe they're not conflict filled, but the protagonist is spending a lot of time anticipating the losses because maybe they're not sure they're going to win. Or maybe this is where the protagonist's allies start reaffirming their loyalty. And so you have like low intensity, but you have a couple of heartwarming moments in these scenes that kind of make readers engage emotionally with what's going on with your protagonist again. So if you can vary setting, if you can put the protagonist in a meaningful setting today, maybe part of his mental preparation is to go to the childhood church where his mother, who is now dead, used to take him every Sunday, and he lost his faith between then and now, but maybe he's going back there because it connects him with his mother. Or it connects him with someone who's important to him. Or maybe if his character growth arc is about reawakening faith, maybe it connects him to that faith that he lost. So think about how you can incorporate your meaningful locations, meaningful to the protagonist, how you can incorporate them into the story to make whatever's happening today more meaningful. If you have a choice between the protagonist hanging out and preparing in a place that doesn't hold any meaning for him, like it's just like, well, we're just at the library because it was convenient, that's not as interesting to the reader if we are preparing at the site where the bomb went off 10 years ago, that they're going to try and catch the bomber. If they're meeting, someplace where they can see that bombing site and it reaffirms their determination to catch the bomber this one final time. You can also look at what setting elements are going to make it harder for your protagonist and his or her allies to prepare. Do they need to work their way through a riot or a mob? Are they going to do something that is illegal or maybe not illegal, but something that people would normally stop them from doing in a area with a lot of surveillance, so they have to be very sneaky about how they do it? Do they have to talk to people and get information from them without letting them know why they need the information? Whatever you can do to use your setting to make it harder for your protagonist to get what they need for this final confrontation, do that. Looking at your story promise. This today and tomorrow, the next couple of days, are the last opportunity you're going to have to promise the reader something about the climax of your story. Excuse me. And how you do that is going to depend again on the story arc and the kind of story you're telling. But just think about it. Maybe make it explicit, the stuff that you already are intuitively reaching for in terms of story elements. If your protagonist is going to be a big climactic battle, the things that your protagonist gathers to prepare for it, if he's going around just like collecting massive numbers of weapons and going around recruiting troops from neighboring kingdoms to prepare for this climax so that he can assault the necromancer's lair, that really, seeing your protagonist stockpiling weapons and getting all these hardened military men together, that promises the reader that there is going to be a pretty intense physical battle at the climax of the story. If your protagonist is going around thinking about how much he's going to miss everyone, or how much he's going to be missed, and how his death is going to affect people, and he's going around making peace with all the people he didn't get along with, and saying goodbye to all his loved ones, that suggests to the reader that the protagonist has a pretty good chance of dying at the climax of the story, that his life is going to be in serious peril. So as you think about your setup, whatever it is you do to have your protagonist get ready, realize that it's promising the reader something about the climax of your story. And if you have the protagonist not really doing a lot of preparation and kind of going into the climax kind of with the attitude of like, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake, you're either promising your reader that the antagonist is a wuss and really not a worthy adversary, or you're promising the reader that the protagonist is arrogant and is going to have an attitude adjustment during the climax. So again, think about what your protagonist preparation right now says about how the battle they're ultimately going to face is going to be. And of course, you don't want to tip your hand and give away any of the twists or surprises that you have planned for your climax. This is really just about broad strokes foreshadowing and letting your reader know the emotional experience that they are probably going to have during the climax of the story. So getting started, as always, please do your pre-writing ritual and your pre-writing exercise. By now, you probably are starting to feel comfortable. Even if you switched rituals or started doing a different exercise, you're probably starting to get into a groove in terms of like sitting down every day and writing. And I just want to suggest that whatever you've chosen for your pre-writing ritual or your exercise, when NaNoWriMo is over, keep doing those. I know almost 1,700 words a day is a big push, especially if you have a full-time job or kids, and you just don't have a couple hours to write every day. You have probably made a huge effort to get through NaNoWriMo. And you're thinking, oh my God, I cannot do this for another 11 months of the year. Right, don't do this for another 11 months of the year. It's a huge push. But think about how you can do this in a smaller way throughout the rest of the year. What if you had half an hour set aside every day to write, no matter what, and your goal was low? You don't have to write 1,700 words, or 1,667, I think is the nano target. You don't have to write that much. But if you sat down every day and said, I'm going to write at least 200 words, or 250 words, that's one page. If you write a page a day, you'll have a novel in a year. That's 365 pages. That's a full novel. If you said, I'm going to every day take half an hour, I'm going to do my pre-writing ritual, I'm going to do a warm-up exercise, and then I'm going to write a page of whatever story I'm working on right now. If you do that and establish that writing habit, that is something that is going to keep you going through terrible times and through awesome times, and keep you on track and keep you generating word count. So if your goal is to write for publication, you want to be able to consistently produce one novel or two novels a year, plus some short stories or a novella, depending on what genre you're in. Romance publishers might very well expect you to write 2 novels and contribute to several anthologies once your career gets going. So don't just let this ritual be something you do for NaNoWriMo every year. Have this be something small and simple that you can do for the rest of the year to keep yourself writing. And I also want to say, you're tired, I'm tired, we're all tired. We want to get to the end of the story. And it's been exciting. It's been exciting for the last 24 days to have written and seen a story take shape and to see those pages stack up. It is really tempting right now when you get to the climax of your story to start rushing and just trying to get to the end. Don't give in to that temptation. I know that you've read books just like I have where the climax kind of fell flat because it was rushed. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to cheat your readers of that awesome final confrontation where everything that happened in the story just comes to a head and explodes, and your characters' lives are changed forever, and thus your readers' lives are changed forever as a result of having had that experience with the characters. So take a deep breath. You've only got 6 more days of writing, including today. Give these scenes your best. And again, this doesn't mean start editing and trying to make the wording perfect, but just try and really dig into the conflict that your characters are experiencing as they build towards the climax. Focus on conflict. If you are writing conflict for these next 6 days, and then of course on the 30th, resolution, because that's when all your storylines get resolved finally, is in the last day of the climax, and then the last day of the novel, the resolution. If you focus on conflict until you get to that final confrontation and get through it, you are going to have an awesome climax that people are going to really find satisfying. Of course, after you write, please always celebrate your progress and prepare for tomorrow. You're probably in the habit of cleaning off your desk now, or getting your notes organized, or jotting down notes on tomorrow's scene, or doing your brainstorming before bed. Whatever you've been doing that's working, do that. If you haven't been preparing for tomorrow and your writing is not as consistent as you would like, or it's hard to get started, I would encourage you, again, maybe go back to some of the earlier videos where we talked about how to prepare for tomorrow. Think about how you could just shove everything in your desk into a box temporarily for 6 days so that you can find it if you need it, but so that it's not cluttering up your desk. If you can just move to a place that's easier to write, if your house is noisy, can you plan to just stop by the library after work tomorrow and write your 1,600 words? Or can you stay at work a little bit late and write at your desk? Whatever you need, whatever is making it difficult for you to write, think today about how you can eliminate that tomorrow. Thanks for hanging out with me. Happy writing today, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow.